Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Dream Deals, because even though it's strictly owned by Americans, one of Britain's best-loved car manufacturers, Vauxhall, is 100 years old this week. So we've come to Luton to join in the celebrations and look at some dream deals, past and present. In 1857, in Vauxhall in South London, Scottish engineer Alexander Wilson set up a small foundry and engineering works, manufacturing all sorts of things from pumps to steam engines. The Vauxhall Ironworks turned its attentions to the newfangled technology that was the petrol engine, and the company developed a single-cylinder unit that was originally designed for marine use. But then the company decided to expand into the pioneering world of car production. This led to a 5-horsepower engine being installed in this, Vauxhall's first ever production car, which was launched 100 years ago this week. With 2 forward speeds and no reverse gear, it's controlled with a hand throttle and a tiller steering arm. And Andy, from Vauxhall's Heritage Centre, has promised to take me for a spin. Wish me luck. Hi, Andy.
Hiya.
So obviously, Andy, you're steering with the tiller. How difficult is that?
It's fairly difficult. It takes a bit of getting used to. Potholes in the road and such like, and the tiller is out of your hand at no time at all.
You've got to keep a firm grip on it.
You have. Definitely.
And the throttle is in your right hand.
It is. So you've got one hand. You've only got really one hand free for the tiller at any time.
And is there anything on this car that you'd find on a modern car? I mean, apart from the wheels, that's the only thing I can see, really.
The coil sprung suspension is something that you'd probably find on a more modern car. Single cylinder, horizontally opposed.
Horizontally opposed?
Yeah. 4-stroke.
Generating how much power?
5 horsepower.
5 horsepower, it's enough to get us up this hill.
Yeah.
Although it now may seem rather crude, this very first Vauxhall car won a hill climb in 1903, and apparently it wasn't just a gentle slope. Selling at £136 a piece, which was a king's ransom in those days, there are only 2 left in the world now, one in the Science Museum in London, and this particular one here at the Vauxhall Heritage Centre, so we'd better be careful. A Vauxhall director, Percy Kidner, drove a 1904 model in the London to Glasgow reliability trial, and although it did very well, everybody realised that a big change had to be made if things were to move forward. It's amazing, nay bizarre, to think that 100 years ago, engineers were discussing the pros and cons of the tiller versus the steering wheel. But after trying out the device on the much faster, more powerful, whopping 6-horsepower engine car, they decided it wasn't up to the job, to be replaced by the much more intuitive steering wheel. The early success of Vauxhall led to them leaving its namesake area of London to the green fields of Luton, 35 miles north. Here a series of cars emerged, each gaining power and losing excess weight. Plus at this stage the company were developing the styling signature as well. Look at these distinctive bonnet flutes that first appeared on the car. These design features were to stay on Vauxhall cars until the late 1950s. In these early days, motoring was only affordable for the very rich and with plenty of time on their hands. The Edwardian toffs devised a plethora of sporting events, time trials and social jamborees in which to show off and to take their new machines to the limits. For the rich, they demanded high levels of customisation, and for the top models, Vauxhall provided the option of selling only the chassis, which could then be built on by the customer's independent coach builders to their own specifications. Vauxhall's sales were really taking off in Edwardian times, and even opened a depot in St. Petersburg to service clients such as the Romanovs, the last Russian royal family. The Russian connection is clear for all to see with this very famous piece of Vauxhall's heritage, the Prince Henry. Named after the man after a successful tour of Prussia, this lovely 4-seater created by Vauxhall designer Lawrence Pomeroy is considered by many to be the world's first true sports car anywhere. Now this car, based on the C-Type 25 horsepower, has won a whole mantelpiece full of sporting trophies. During the austerity of the First World War, the company's coffers were kept full by sales of the rather less exciting D-Type. This car may not have been very sporty, but proved reliable and well designed, and over 2,000 were bought by the British Army to be used as their mainstay military car. Now a Vauxhall D-Type like this one even carried King George V across the muddy battlefields in Flanders, and it saw service with the forces in Egypt too. There's a picture of General Edmund Allenby here leading the British forces into Jerusalem after defeating the Turkish army. So it was a marketing victory for Vauxhall too. Now, a lot of people think that it was relatively recent that General Motors bought Vauxhall, but it was in fact 1925 when a cheque for $2.5 million arrived here at the Luton headquarters, and this became the first European manufacturing base for the American giants. Now, maybe the success of rivals Ford was beginning to make waves, but Vauxhall, after the First World War, decided to move away from large exclusive models to smaller, more affordable machines like this, and even experimented with Vauxhall motorbikes. The first sign of the merger with General Motors was this, the Cadet in 1930, boasting up to 26 horsepower, count them, and with the price of under £300, this was a very attractive buy, especially with a first for British car manufacturing, a synchromesh gearbox. No more double D-clutch misery. By the mid-1930s, Vauxhall employed over 6,000 people at the Luton factory, and the company's annual turnover exceeded £7 million. In 1937, this beautiful Vauxhall 10 proved to be a major breakthrough. In fact, it was the first car to have an integral chassis and body. This reduced production costs, which meant that this car could be on your drive for an astonishing £168. This in turn made for smoother and quieter motoring, and the new design considerably reduced excess body weight.
The 10, which came out in 1938, was really quite sensational because we were using General Motors technology, and the piece of technology that really worked here was the so-called unitary construction of the body. It did away with the chassis, so no longer a flexible chassis with a wooden metal structure perched on top. This was a car like an egg. It was built in one unitary body. And of course it got rid of all those annoying squeaks and rattles. It made for a much lighter car, a much stiffer car. And what you got as an owner was a very affordable and extremely economical and quite high performance car for a 1200cc car.
During the Second World War, Vauxhall once again found itself a supplier to the British Army, not only for cars but for trucks from its new Bedford truck range. 250,000 Bedford trucks were supplied in the 6 years of the war. Plus, Vauxhall designed and built almost 6,000 Churchill tanks to assist the war effort. They even produced 750,000 army helmets. After the war, the company went back, albeit slowly, to producing small passenger cars, although at first the government said that most new car production needed to be sold overseas to aid the post-war economy. Then in 1951, the E-Type hit the headlines. No, this was a full decade before Jaguar's namesake. This was the Vauxhall E-Type. And it had a radical new design, and for the first time a body shell that incorporated the front wings and lights. Now, the variants of this car included this, the basic 4-cylinder E-Type Wyvern, and then in 1954, the luxurious 6-cylinder Cresta. By the beginning of the 1960s, after 2 million cars had rolled off Vauxhall's production lines, a major investment programme began, with this all-new facility at Ellesmere Port on the old Houghton wartime airfield. During 1964, the first HA Viva rolled off the line, and over 100,000 of those little dinky machines were sold in the next year. An astonishing achievement. The Viva today may seem terribly crude, but it really was the kind of car that everybody was talking about, and many young people were saving up to buy their first car. This looked very different from any other cars on the road at the time, and it was very affordable. The HB Viva built on the success of the HA and had 26 different models in its range, including a 2-litre GT, and over 500,000 of these HB Vivas were built. Now this is a less powerful 1100, but it's still a glorious classic. And I'm going to have a drive of it. Now this car does make you feel seriously nostalgic. This HB Victor came out in 1966. Obviously a great year for English football, but probably a very good year for Vauxhall as well, because this car took the Viva onto a different level. It had coil springs all round, the suspension was much improved from the Viva HA, and this car sold over 500,000 units. I actually like the gearbox for low down speed. You aren't going to have much fun above 40 or 50 miles an hour. But just driving around these town streets in Luton, the ratios are quite close together, so it means that as you put it into second after you've accelerated, it comes back in at, I guess, about 2,000 or 3,000 revs rather than low down. So it makes for, should we say, brisk acceleration. Going uphill is where you really feel the lack of power in this Viva. It's really struggling with only its 1100 engine. It could have done with just a little bit more, and there's no passengers or luggage in this car, so I can't see how it's going to fare over Snake Pass with a family of 5 in. But you can just imagine in the late 60s, when motorways were few and far between, that driving out in your Viva on a family day like today, with a picnic in the back and the kids on the back seat, it'd make a great family car, and that's what Vauxhall specialised in, affordable family cars. This car would have been about £600 at the time. Still only for the middle classes and above, but getting more and more affordable all the time. One of the things that really took the Viva on from the HA to this, the HB, was the coil springs all around, which made for a very comfortable modern ride as opposed to the old leaf springs, which were very creaky to say the least. Now, if you're about my age, this is the model of Viva you may remember being driven to toddlers clubs in, the HC Viva, and this is where we get seriously nostalgic. The range included a 2.3 litre Magnum version and the Fiorenza droop snoot. Now note the vinyl roof as well. That bit of class would have set you back £31.59 as an optional extra in those days. Snazzy. Of course, I was a lot smaller in those days. Now, throughout the 1960s and 70s, enormous competition and a general economic depression signalled potential problems for Vauxhall. Now, you'd have thought that it would have been easier just to modify or re-engineer some of the cars from their American owners, GMs, if you will. But that didn't happen.
I think this is an age-old problem. It's good to take technologies from a parent like General Motors because of the investment involved, and that meant over the years that Vauxhall brought out a whole number of first synchronous transmissions, the unitary body, etc. But to bring just American cars over here really never has worked for anyone. I think it's self-evident that the road conditions, the petrol consumption conditions, the price of fuel, etc., and indeed just the whole way of life that is very much different either side of the Atlantic really means it just doesn't work. So I think Vauxhall took a very sensible tack, and that was to build cars using British engineers, using British technology, but then taking the very, very best that they could get from the General Motor research.
Well, that's all for part one, but do stay with us as we're only halfway through our history of the famous Griffin, and things start to hot up with, amongst others, the VX220 and the legendary Lotus Carlton. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.